Hey, what's up everybody? So this is Darren, AWD GT2 in my 2019 Kia Stinger. If you haven't followed me prior or just jumping on board, what I got here is a 1-inch Plenum spacer. So if you're new to this, alright, that is what they would call a carb spacer. For here it's this is a GDI motor. But anyway, we're going to put a spacer in my Kia Stinger. Why? Because no other Kia Stinger has one. What I ended up doing is chatting with a good friend of mine, Joel Williams. He was number 1 on the list, and I was number 2. We kept brainstorming on how do we get our cars faster? How do we get our cars faster? So we came up with the idea of this spacer. So what I ended up doing is I bought this, lower intake off eBay. So the way the Kias are set up is you have a lower intake and an upper intake. So I'm going to take my lower intake off. This is what we're going to see. And what I did is I used this to design this. All right. So I catted it, got a machine shop to cut it. So a couple things you got to do when you pull your upper intake off. First thing you're going to see is there's these studs here that are driven in pretty hard. So you got to pull these studs off. The way you do that is you got to use 2 M6 nuts. And what you'll do is you'll take these and you'll tighten them together really tight, and then you can put a crescent wrench on here and back the whole thing off, and then you'll be able to remove this stud. Okay, and there's one on this side too, so on the passenger side, front and rear. Once you get them off, you got to come up with a plan to make up the difference of this thickness that goes in between the upper and the lower intake. So I took some measurements. What I came up with, you're going to need M6 bolts, M6 1 by 50 millimeter, and that should make up the difference to go through the upper intake, through the 1-inch spacer, and then into your lower intake. So I am not going to film me turning wrenches. What I am going to do is pull my upper intake. I'm going to bring it over here. I'm going to clamp it to this plenum. I'm going to flip it over and mark holes. Then I'm going to drill the 8 holes to make sure everything's perfectly aligned. Then I need to make a gasket. I'll video that. And we'll throw it all back in. Some of the issues that I anticipate running into, and I'll show you here in a second. Okay, so the first issue I was worried about is with 1-inch rise here is the hood still gonna fit. So what I did is I cut a piece of cardboard and I laid this thing all over the hood and opened and all over the upper intake, opened and closed the hood several times. There's no interference, so that tells me that when this is raised 1 inch, I am not gonna have issues even with this support structure here. This is a C-bond hood, by the way. The other one, you got 2 coolant lines that run to your throttle. Took a close look at them. I think with this raised up, these are going to stretch. Shouldn't be a really big issue. So I don't anticipate any problems there. Got some vacuum lines back here, but I think they're all going to be fine. These are just, brackets that will raise up. Shouldn't be an issue there. The other thing is, will the charge pipe stretch and reach up? I think there's enough play between this rubber piece and the one down there coming off the intercooler, but we'll figure that piece out. And the last thing is you've got to there's a bolt down here. If anybody's taking off the charge pipe, you got to pull this bracket off, and that'll allow this thing to raise up or down. But I'm just winging it, guys. We'll see if this thing works. All right, so I got the upper intake off. Took me about an hour, and I literally had no idea what I was doing, meaning I've never done pulled off the upper intake though. About an hour's work. Wasn't hard, not a whole lot of stuff you got to figure out. Still got the throttle hooked up here, but yep, this is what your upper intake looks like. And there's the bottom, and there's the lower. And like I was saying about these studs, let me go back over here. Yeah, so what I got to do is I got to pull out this stud and that stud using that trick I showed you earlier, and then just use my longer bolts. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp my spacer onto this upper here, and I'm going to flip it over and mark my holes. Then I'll take it over to my drill press. I'll drill the holes so I know everything will be lined up. Then I'll match it up to the lower in the car, and then once I do that, I may do some porting just to fine-tune where these ovals are, so I get really good clean flow, not a lot of turbulence. And so yep, stand by, that's my next step. Okay, so I got the plenum, got the C-clamp to the bottom of the upper intake right where I want it. All the ovals are lined up. So what I found is probably the best thing to use is I've got a punch set. This is a .280, and it fits perfect in these holes right here. So what I'm going to do is mark, just lightly tap these down to mark the plenum material. Let's see, yep, right down in there. So I got 8 to mark. Then I'll pull the plenum off, take it over to the drill press, and drill the holes. Let's stand by. Okay, using my .280 center punch, just took off the clamps. You can see I've got some nice dimples. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So I'm going to go ahead and mark these. I'll do a little countersink first, then I'll drill them out so they fit these M6x1 by 200s. Then I'll make the gasket, and it's going back in. All right, what I'm going to use first to mark these is it's a 90-degree carbide point tip, so that'll give a nice little chamfer to start these off before I drill them out to size. So I'm gonna go ahead and knock that out now. All right, so I got the plenum all drilled out. It looks pretty good, real clean. What I'm gonna do is just do a test fit. I still gotta pull these studs because they're not gonna be long enough, but I'll pull these studs out, get my 8 bolts in, make sure everything lines up. Then I'll get on to making the gasket so I can finish putting this thing back together. All right, so I got the plenum in. This is just a test fit, just to make sure everything lines up. I'm really pleased with the fitment. I think the 280 drill bit was perfect. I got my 2-inch M6x1 screws in, just real loose. So the next thing I got to do is, because there's a gasket there already, I got to make a gasket for this half so the upper intake sits on it, and obviously it's sealed. So let's get to that. Okay, onto the gasket making. So mark the bottom, don't want to mess that up. What I'm going to do is probably put spray glue on this, flip it over. I'm going to probably take it inside the house where I got better light, use an X-Acto, and I'm just going to cut out the ovals, cut out the shape, and then I got some leather tools or punches, and I'm just going to punch holes where these are, and then I can start wrapping this thing up. As far as the rubber, I got it on Amazon. I'll put a link down below on where to get it. I did do some testing. I took a scrap piece of it because I got a whole roll. I put a little RM109 racing gas on a little piece, and then just straight 100% ethanol, and I let it sit there. I tried it on 2 occasions until it basically evaporated. There was no reaction to the rubber. It didn't erode. No black came up. It was pretty good. So gasket's almost done. Got it all trimmed up. It's still glued here to the bottom. That'll just peel right up. I can clean it up with a little rubbing alcohol. But my next task is I got to mark these holes. into the rubber. So I went out in the shop, found a couple things, another center punch. That seemed to work pretty well. Does an okay mark. Also had a nail set. That'll work pretty good too. I can get that centered. So what I'm gonna do is mark these holes, 8 of them all the way around. And then I dug through my leather tools and I got some punches. And what I'm gonna end up doing is using probably this punch right here to punch a hole in the rubber, so we can go all the way through. I'll get to that in a second. Stand by. Get this in the light. All right, so I got the upper intake, and the spacer is now temporarily fixed with the gasket. Holes worked out pretty good, and I just got it here on a corner and a corner. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to port this intake to match the plenum. So I'm going to go around and look for lips, either overhangs or underhangs. I'm going to mark them with a paint marker. Yeah, I can see there's some lips. Yeah, these are all 2-piece cast injected molded. None of them are going to be the same, so there's always going to be some variances. So I'm just going to match the intake. Just got a little bit of a lip all around a few spots here, so, and some of them are lined up perfect. It is what it is. But I'm going to go ahead and mark those, get my Dremel, clean up some of these lips right here. Then I'll do the same thing. I'll just take that bottom of the plenum, put it on here, feel for lips and ridges and stuff, and I'm gonna go with that. As you can see, I got rid of all the yellow. This is the carbide burr I decided to use. I just had a really steep angle, so I thought it'd make a nice transition in where there was a hard lip. What I'm gonna do now is I got 220 sandpaper, and I'm just gonna hand sand all this rough stuff from its casting, from the molds that comes from the factory, make these really nice and smooth, good transition. Then I'll take the 1-inch plenum. I'll put this on the lower, and I'll do the same thing. Say hi, Belle. Hey, Belle. All right, so I've got the upper intake all cleaned up. I'm real happy and pleased with that. Blew it out with some air, so this piece is ready. Put the plenum back on. I just secured it with 2 bolts. I'm feeling around. I only see really 2 spots that need attention. So what I'm going to do is, for the spot on the lower that needs to be dremeled out, I'm going to use the yellow, and then if it needs to be taken down or smoothed out on the plenum, I'm going to use black and mark that spot. So there's only really like 2 spots, so it should go pretty quick. I'm just going to stuff a rag down in there and have a vacuum ready, so when I Dremel it, you don't get that stuff down into your chamber. But getting close, getting close. Okay, one more thing I'm going to do. I'm really pleased at just a little porting I had to do around these edges where I marked them with the black marker in there. I think they cleaned up real nice. I did go and recheck the fit. The lip's gone, so I'm real happy with that. But I want to make sure that this is absolutely flat. So I took 2 pieces of 120, just used some 3M glue onto this piece of marble or granite, and I'm gonna run this over and make sure there's no humps or lumps. I don't want any leaks. Then I'll peel the gasket off, I'll clean up the glue, and I'll do the same thing to the top side. So that's what I'm going to do now. Yeah, so the bottom piece I'm pretty pleased with. It's pretty flat. See one tiny little low spot there, but that literally is probably only about a 1/2 thou. And with the rubber gasket, that's not going to be an issue. So I may go over it with the sandpaper a little bit more, but as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty good. I'm going to pull the gasket off, do the same thing on the other side, just clean up that glue. Alright, so everything's pretty close. I'm going to be buttoning things back up here real shortly, but I'm going to back up and talk about a 1-inch spacer and why I did this. Alright, so I didn't invent the spacer. They've been out on muscle cars and naturally aspirated cars and turbo cars and fuel injected cars for years and years, probably 50s, maybe even earlier. And it's a well-known fact, by using a spacer, elevating the fuel and air source off the deck, you're going to gain horsepower. some cars receive up to 15 horsepower and a couple pounds of torque in the low to mid-range. Dynos don't lie, so these work. What I invented is this one for the Stinger, because there hasn't been one. There's only 2 in existence. I sent one to Joel, and this is the first one. So aside from separating the air-fuel mixture, giving it more time to atomize and better distribution in the cylinders, you're also raising it from the heat source. So by doing that, you're gonna have colder air and fuel entering your chambers, your cylinders. So that again, cooler air is denser, more air fuel mixture, more horsepower. So the other thing is possible, and this is probably the route I'm gonna lean, because now we have 1-inch room, I can drill and tap methanol injectors on each side. So I've got a dual meth setup. I can take one of these out, distribute that methanol by 6 using like maybe 1 gallon per hour jets in here, and that will ensure that the methanol is evenly distributed between all 6 cylinders. Because here's the problem with Kia when they designed this car. So for a 365 horsepower car, this works okay. All right, stock PSI is around 12 or 13 before you do an ECU or a JB4 or anything. And air enters this chamber, and it takes a 90 degree, which is no bueno. It's really not that good doing 90 degree turns, especially when you have methanol injection, because now what you're expecting this mist to take this 90 degree turn, and it's going to start bouncing off walls and just doing things it shouldn't, and then it's got to distribute between 6 cylinders here. And when you're adding, you know, up to 10 pounds of boost, some guys are pushing 22, 23 pounds, you're just not going to have even distribution. So that methanol, the jets individually would fix that. The other thing you can do, Joel and I talked about it, is he's got CPI, charge port injection. Instead of doing it in your charge pipe, you can actually do CPI in each cylinder. And what that'll do, and we believe, and I think Terry even commented on it, you could run full E85 with the right high pressure fuel pump and low pressure fuel pump. You can run straight E85. There's not a Stinger that can do that right now. The highest, even with CPI, is like around E50. But if you were to direct port inject E85 there to include your GDI, you could probably get E85. So Joel's going to mess around with that and see if we can pull it off. And the third thing, which I am not messing with, is nitrous. Yep, you can put tiny jets, wet nitrous. You might even go dry nozzles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But all those options are available if you just get the spacer. So my plan is to put the spacer together, see if the car likes it, run it a couple times. I got a track day tomorrow night. We'll see how it adapts, but I think it's going to work fine. Then I'll go ahead and start planning out and laying out parts and pieces to run 6 jets. So I'll pull this thing back apart, drill, tap, and maybe document that too. But for now, I'm not going to document me putting this thing back together, but the next time I'm up, I'll be firing up. We'll see what happens, we'll see if the car gives any check engine lights or anything like that, but I think I'll be good. Okay, I would call this a Christmas miracle. I got almost everything hooked up. Just shut the hood and reopened it. No clearance problems whatsoever. So yeah, absolute Christmas miracle. So even with the spacer, I raised everything up 1 inch. Everything so far has reached. I was able to relocate these brackets. There's only one bracket back here that I'm not too worried about. It's not going anywhere, but all the vacuums, the PVC, your T-map or your map sensor, IAT, throttle, everything looks like it's going to bolt up. The only thing I haven't tried yet is the charge pipe, so I'm just doing a quick update. So there we're at. Very, very pleased and lucky at the same time. Got meth? Can't believe it. Everything fit. I got the charge pipe on, all the brackets for the electrical stuff, the vacuums, the PVC stuff, all the sensors. There's only 2 brackets I couldn't get on. One is quite obvious. That's this one here. There's going to be 1 inch difference, so I may make a small bracket, but this intake's not going anywhere. And then this one back here, a little tricky. The only thing that's keeping it from stretching and putting a bolt in is the wire. So I'm gonna have to take a closer look at that. Maybe I can extend it, but for now it's not going anywhere. I'm not too worried about it. But yeah, that's it. Everything's tied in. Only got a couple bolts extra. I don't remember where these came from. If you guys know, comment below. I know where these two go. I just can't get those in, but yeah, I lost those. So, hey, let's start this thing up. See if it shows any check engines or if it works. All right, let's see if this thing will run. Cross your fingers. Oh yeah. Well, she looks pretty good. It's gonna be all right. Gonna be all right. Let's cut it off. I want to talk about one more thing I totally forgot about. Unintended advantage with putting a 1-inch spacer. Those of you know, getting a plug 3 is a pain, or getting that coil pack out. Think of how much easier it's going to be now that this thing's lifted up a whole inch. Getting that plug there is gonna be a delight. So now you take your plug changes from like an hour to probably like 20 minutes, because you can get out all 3 of those, no issues at all. So there it is. I'm gonna take this thing out in a little bit. I gotta put the dog up, see how she runs, make sure there's no boost leaks, vacuum leaks, tighten it up, and I'll let you know how it works. Thanks for watching.